Alrighty everyone, hello. And now, as you know, I'm a very big fan of Saint Hildegard von Bingen. I think that she is an incredible powerhouse, the original crystal girly. Like, she is basically what Christian witches are still trying to hold on to, literally 1,000 years before the term Christian witch even became a thing. It's kind of impressive. I've already made a video about it before that you can check out, but seriously, today I got a little bit more to talk about with her because I just read the most fantastic book about her, and that is Matthew Fox's Hildegard of Bingen, A Saint for Our Times. I've read a little bit of this book before, but I finally got it and read the whole thing cover to cover myself, and I gotta say, this book is really cool if you want to get not just like a background of Hildegard and like what's going on with her, but also like how the things she had to say then, 1,000 years ago, are still very, very relevant today. And so before we get into the book itself and what I liked about it and what I kind of think maybe people should watch out for... Yay, bee! Bee! No. You're gonna come in my lap and you're gonna peck at me. Huh? You're gonna be such a rude little mean man. Anyway, before we get too deep into the book, we should really talk about the author as well, because I think the author is of note, right? A pretty impressive guy. Matthew Fox here, he is actually a former Catholic priest. Why are you harassing me? Why are you harassing? Ah! But so like on the back of the book, right, it notes that Matthew Fox actually used to be a Catholic priest, right? And it says he was a member of the Dominican order for 34 years until silenced by the Vatican in 1989 and formally dismissed in 1993. Now he works as an Episcopal priest, which, if you guys know anything about the Episcopal Church, to me it honestly does feel like just like Diet Catholic. In fact, my priest at my current Episcopal church made a joke where it's like, yeah, you know, Episcopals are like Diet Catholic. It's only a third of the guilt. But honestly, Episcopalian denomination is very much like Catholic aesthetically, still kind of has the same beats, the same liturgy. It just doesn't have the Pope as the head. It has a Council of Bishops as the head, which is interesting. And they tend to be a lot more progressive and a lot more friendly to mysticism and Christian mystics. And so, of course, the reason he was dismissed is because actually he pulled a Martin Luther a little bit, and, you know, with the Catholic Church being such, with the Catholic Church being so problematic of an institution, having covered up some really nasty crimes and continuing to cover up and protect crimes and their committers, he got dismissed because he was kicking up a fuss, being very loud about the fact that the Catholic Church was putting power and institution before the well-being of the people. And makes a point in this book very often that the Catholic Church is accusing nuns in America of being radical feminists for literally just following the ways of Christ, like by not wanting people to be stripped of their rights or, you know, be disenfranchised, which you would think is common sense. However, Matthew Fox also does have a doctorate in theology and history from the Institut Catholique de Paris, and he also started his own kind of spiritual university of sorts, which helps people kind of understand a more balanced theology, I guess, in which his whole thing is really balancing that sacred masculine, divine feminine, and not just kind of putting all the focus on like a male god and a male ordered religion, but on a religion where everyone is present. So I think that that's really nice and really cool. I think in general this guy has a lot of great education and a lot of great experience and things to share, and that his work is super important. I do think that there are some things to watch out for in this book, which we'll talk about in a bit, but for the most part the guy himself seems to know what he's talking about and just is bending in that more mystic kind of broadened spirituality lens, which I would not be surprised about at all, knowing that he went from Catholic to Episcopal. Being Episcopal just seems to come with the territory of getting a more broad and mystic view of spirituality, so hell yeah, I'll take it. But so now, let me tell you a bit about what I liked about this book. What I liked about this book, the biggest thing in fact, was the fact that it's not just a book about Hildegard, right? It's not just a book about her and like her life and the things she does. Those things are included, touched upon, and given like a brief introduction and overview of her. But more than that, it's that this author puts her words and her, passions and her points that she wrote to emperors and the Pope and kings and all these other folks, he puts that alongside and in conversation with the many other mystics of our time. So he basically says, hey, you know what? She was talking a good game 1,000 years ago, and she could easily fit among any of our more modern mystics now in the modern era too. And so in that, he really focuses on the fact that, like, Hildegard was big on ecological justice. She very much was like, listen, this planet is ours to take care of. And she would give visions, right? Give visions and warnings, prophecy basically, let's be real, that had her telling people, listen, God told me that if you don't take care of this planet, he will give creation the permission to punish you. There are many times where her visions and her writings are written like from the perspective of God, like she's speaking as if it is God just kind of using her mouth like a mouthpiece more than anything, which is very, very interesting, because a lot of folks would have you believe that God just kind of disappeared at the end of Revelation. The Bible concluded, and then God just went on vacation. He went out fishing, he went out for milk, he went out somewhere, and left us all alone forever since. But that's not what happened at all, and we could see with people like St. Hildegard that he was very much still speaking, and people just were not listening. And so he makes a point that St. Hildegard was very much, concerned with the idea of people not loving justice, and in fact even calls justice the king's daughter, the king being God, personifies justice as a woman, personifies Lady Love as a woman, as in love like the Holy Spirit, that force that was with God during creation. And she also makes the point that, hey, God did not stop creating. Co-creation is a big theme in this book, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later in my thoughts about that. But yeah, so in this book, I mean, Hildegard meets Mary Oliver, meets Albert Einstein, meets Howard Thurman, meets all of these other really big names. And honestly, I think one of the most wonderful parts of this is also the discussion of like the 4 channels of a mystic life, the 4 channels that people need to go through to get to God. And that's Hildegard's via positiva, via negativa, via creativa, and via transformativa. So via positiva is like this idea that, you know, we are to experience the gladness of God, like all the good things about life, right? Like we are to be joyful and jubilant and all these other things. The via negativa is that part where we start thinking, okay, things are dark and grim, right? That dark night of the soul kind of moment where that all people have. That's that moment where we have to experience, you know, the absence of God too. Just as much as we experience his presence in positiva, we have to experience his absence in negativa. And once you get past those, you get to creativa, which is creation, right? Where you are creating arts, music, writings, all these other kinds of things that Hildegard was making. And then transformativa. Fox describes that as the 4th path of the spiritual journey according to the creation spiritual lineage. This is a path of compassion and justice, which is a prophetic path. So the mystic goes through positiva, the negativa, then develops the creativa, and the prophetic passages here in the transformativa. And then he has this really cool quote from Rabbi Abraham Heschel that explains that the prophet's primary work is to interfere. And then William Hawking, the American philosopher, says the prophet is the mystic in action. So basically a prophet is just what happens when a mystic gets sick of everyone's shit and starts being really loud about the things that need to change. Makes sense. Of all the definitions I've ever seen of prophet, that one just felt like it made the most sense, you know? But so, like, putting Hildegard through the lens of all these more modern mystics, and, you know, kind of contextualizing her words for the modern day and how they're still important in the modern day, is just so cool. It just really helps you not only appreciate Hildegard as someone who existed way back when, but also someone who is still so relevant and whose voice is still so powerful. And I mean, given that she was alive in the Middle Ages but wasn't canonized until October 2012, yeah. And now she is considered a doctor of the church, and that's why Fox makes this point that it's kind of crazy that the Catholic Church would be yelling at nuns in America for being radical feminists when they canonized and made doctor of the church Saint Hildegard, who was very much about, like, personifying the divine as female, about, you know, all the crystals and herbs and the power of nature and justice and, you know, all these other kinds of things. Like, Catholic Church, wait, why are you the way that you are? So honestly, with all that, there's so much to love about this, you know, to see, like, how Hildegard compares to others, how her messages are still living on, how all of the things that she did in her life are just so ballsy, gutsy, incredibly powerful, and incredibly undaunted. Like, it's amazing. But there are some things I did not like about this book, and honestly, namely, it was just the fluffiness that got put in here. Like, I personally am one that chafes whenever someone's constantly like, sacred masculine, divine feminine, just because it's like, I feel like they're terms that have been so co-opted by like the New Age movement and just made to mean like almost nothing. But if you can get past that, the other thing that was bothering me was the fact that this guy's talking about chakras a lot, or chakra, as in like, you know, the part of Hinduism, you know, talking about the throat chakra and all this kind of stuff, and it's like, you don't need to mix that in here. Like, you don't need to use parts of a completely separate religious system to explain what you're talking about. You don't need to appropriate them in that way to talk about someone who's completely removed from that system, you know? And so there's a lot of times where he's talking about this stuff and I'm like, would Hildegard like agree with or understand what you're talking about right now? Like, would she be about this or what? A tiny touch of like Western you know, good intentions, like, I don't know, talking about like the injustices that women and girls are facing in Southeast Asia. It's like, okay, that's a real thing to talk about, but I just feel like until you are very loudly talking about the things happening in your own backyard, do not look into the neighbor's backyard to see what mess is happening over there. You know what I mean? Like don't look at your neighbor's backyard to see, you know, whatever's going on there when your own backyard is already on fire. There's a lot we could already talk about that's happening here in this country with the abuse of women and girls, that we don't need to start pointing at like random foreign countries and different cultures. Of course, abuse against women and girls is bad no matter where it's happening. It just always has a weird flavor when white people bring up non-white cultures to point and say, isn't this so terrible? You know what I'm saying? It's not that I don't think that it should be addressed, it's just that you gotta watch out for that little bit of white saviorism. And I kind of caught the faintest little sparkle of that in here, and I was like, okay, slow down. Hold on. Pause. Right? And my last thing I really didn't like, honestly, is that, yes, this man is very much educated, experienced, very cool, and very, very intelligent and very thoughtful. You could tell when you read his work, but it did feel sometimes like he was more using Hildegard as a mouthpiece and a convenient shield to criticize the Catholic Church with, rather than actually lifting up Hildegard's voice. Like, it felt like he was kind of, at some point, writing these things out of bitterness, or out of just, you know, anger with the church, which is understandable. But knowing that he was once dismissed from that church, too, it's kind of like, rein it in a little bit. As I would tell my students, hold on, check the bias, pull it back a little bit, and ask yourself, are you being fair to everyone involved here? Of course, I'm not saying we need to be fair to an institution that covers up horrible stuff. However, I am saying that when you know that the person saying it was someone who was actively dismissed from it, it kind of feels like maybe there just might be a chip on the shoulder, which detracts from his point, unfortunately, and makes it difficult for people. So like, I could see people saying, well, you're just upset that you got kicked out, so none of this matters, right? Like, you really want to be careful with that kind of thing. And now, that finally, with all that said, let me get into the big point that really kind of just blew me away. It kind of really lifted my spirits after reading this, and like, that is just that idea of co-creation that I mentioned earlier. So in this book, right, we're talking about Hildegard, we're talking about how we are all one, we're all dependent on each other, right? Like, humans are dependent most of all on nature, because we are subsistent on nature. That's also why it is our job, our divine role, to be protecting nature, taking care of the planet, being its steward, right? But there was this idea, right, because Lady Love, this force that's with God in the beginning of creation, Hildegard makes the point that she never went away, that she is still creating, that God is active, and God is speaking, and God is still creating to this day, and that we are participating in that creation. That is something that just kind of like brain blasted me, because I realized, wait a minute, so many times Christians have accused witches of all faiths that they are worshipping creation instead of creator. But like, reading that kind of just connected it for me that no. We are not worshipping creation instead of creator when we include herbs and stones and other things into our spell work. We are worshipping creator with creation, because Hildegard understands that creation has power, and that creation reflects God, and that all these other things, you know, that God made have essence and life. And Fox also brings up Meister Eckhart, which says a very similar thing, right? Which says that every single creature is a book about God, is a word of God. Every single creature reflects God. He is in all things he made. So really, if we as creation who reflect God are worshiping and praising him, why not would everything else that he made do the same? And just as we have our talents, right? Just as we might come together as a group of people and assign jobs to each other or support each other with our skills and talents, so too does God's creation. So when we're making a spell with stones and herbs and everything else, we are recruiting his creation to all sing up those praises together and ask for our prayers to be answered. It just makes it a much more interconnected and communal experience that really is good for the soul. Because I found, like, after I started thinking about these things and going about it, I found that I had, honestly, a better mood. I was looking around saying, everything here is good, right? The trees, the flowers, everything else, like, it's all beautiful, and we are blessed to be among it, you know? The birds, the trees, the animals outside, the fish, all of these things we are so blessed to be around. And when you have that thought process, it really does just lift you up. And I think it just makes the magic that we do that much more special when we realize that we are creating change with God when we do these prayers and these spells. We are creating praises and prayers and all these other kinds of good things with his creation that we lift up to him. It's so much more enriching to think of it that way than to just kind of go through the motions, you know what I mean? To really inject that sense of gratitude and awe into everything you do as a mystic, as a witch, as anything else. It's just good. And I would love to know your thoughts on the same. But with all that said, I really do think you should pick up this book if you haven't already. Hildegard is a wonderful figure, and I really suggest you learn more about her and the things she had to say. So with all that said, I will see you guys next time for some more Christian witch discussions, and I hope this gave you some stuff to think about today. So yeah, see ya!